Welcome to Live Podcast. As we journey through the Bible, today we are in Acts chapter 23, and here we see Paul before the Jewish High Council, in which he addresses them. So he says, gazing intently at the High Council, Paul began, "Brothers, I have always lived before God with a clear conscience." Instantly, Ananias, the high priest, commanded those close to Paul to slap him on the mouth. Imagine, dude has not even spoken and they want to beat him on the mouth. But Paul said to him, "God will slap you, you corrupt hypocrite. What kind of judge are you to break the law yourself by ordering me struck like that?" Like, Paul knew the law because in Deuteronomy chapter 19 verse 15, it says, I'd like us to read. Deuteronomy 19 verse 15, it says, "You must not convict anyone of a crime on the testimony of only one witness. The facts of the case must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses." So Paul knew that they had no authority to strike him. That is why he answered back at the high priest. Those standing near Paul said to him, "Do you dare to insult God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I'm sorry, brothers. I didn't realize he was the high priest." Paul replied, "For the scriptures say, you must not speak evil of any of your rulers." This is found in Exodus 22 verse 28. Paul realized that some members of the high council were Sadducees and some were Pharisees. So he shouted. Like, he was sharp. He was street smart. So he shouted, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee," because he was back in the days, "as were my ancestors. And I am on trial because my hope is in the resurrection of the dead." So clearly, Paul knew that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. So he was like, okay, let me just say this. And then he caused a stir. This divided the council because the Pharisees believed in the resurrection. The Sadducees did not. So the council was divided, and the Pharisees against the Sadducees. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection or angels or spirits, but the Pharisees believe in all of this. So there was a great uproar between the two, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Some of the teachers of the religious law who were there, Pharisees, jumped up and began to argue forcefully. And they said, "We see nothing wrong with him." They shouted, "Perhaps a spirit or an angel spoke to him." I mean, what if it did? As the conflict grew more violent, the commander was afraid they would tear Paul apart. So he ordered his soldiers to go and rescue him by force and take him back to the fortress. So the commander ordered the soldiers to go and take Paul. That night, the Lord appeared to Paul and said, "Be encouraged, Paul. Just as you have been a witness to me here in Jerusalem, you must preach the good news in Rome as well." So God will always encourage us even in our journey, okay? And next we see the plan of the Jews to kill Paul. The next morning, a group of Jews got together and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. How would you bind yourself with such an evil thing? There were more than 40 of them in the conspiracy. They went to the leading priests and elders and told them, "We have bound ourselves with an oath not to eat nothing until we have killed Paul. So you, the high council, should ask the commander to bring Paul back to the council again. Pretend you want to examine his case more fully. We will kill him on the way." Wow, these people were just evil. And they used the council to be part of the evil agenda. But Paul's nephew, his sister's son, heard of their plan and went to the fortress and told Paul. Paul called for one of the Roman officers and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something important to tell him." So the officer did, explaining, "Paul, the prisoner, called me over and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." Thank God that the commander actually heard the young man, and he said, the commander took his hand, led him aside and asked, "What is it that you want to tell me?" Paul's nephew told him, "Some Jews are going to ask you to bring Paul before the high council tomorrow, pretending they want to get some more information. But don't do it. There are more than 40 men hiding along the way, ready to ambush him. They have vowed not to eat or drink anything until they have killed him. They are ready now, just waiting for you for your consent. Don't let anyone know you have told me this, the commander warned the young man. So immediately, because the commander knew what they were planning, he sent Paul to Caesarea. Then the commander called two of his officers and ordered, "Get 200 soldiers ready to leave for Caesarea at 9 o'clock tonight in the evening. Also take 200 spearmen and 70 mounted troops. Provide horses for Paul to ride and get him safely to Governor Felix." Then he wrote this letter to the governor. From Claudius Lysis to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by some Jews, and they were about to kill him when I arrived with the troops. When I learned that he was a Roman citizen, I moved him to safety. Then I took him to the High Council to try and learn on the basis of the accusations against him. I soon discovered the charge was something regarding their religious law, certainly nothing worthy of imprisonment or death. But when I was informed of a plot to kill him, I immediately sent him on to you. I have told his accusers to bring their charges before you. So the officer, God granted him wisdom, and he sent Paul to Caesarea, and he sent him with a letter. Okay. But the Life Application Bible Study says this. He says, "How did Luke know what was written in the letter from Claudius Lysis? In his concern for historical accuracy, Luke used many sources to make sure that his writings were correct." Okay, this letter was probably read aloud in court when Paul came before Felix to answer the Jews' accusations. Also, because Paul was a Roman citizen, a copy may have been given to him as courtesy. So that is why maybe Luke, who's the writer of the book of Acts, gets to know the information of what was in the letter that was sent to the governor. So that night, as ordered, the soldiers took Paul as far as Patris. They returned to the fortress in the morning, while the mounted troops took him to Caesarea. When they arrived in Caesarea, they presented Paul and the letter to Governor Felix. He read it and then asked Paul what province he was from, to which he said, "Cilicia." Paul answered, "I will hear your case myself when your accusers arrive," the governor told him. Then the governor ordered him kept in prison at Herod's headquarters. And that's it. That's Acts 23. That was 35 verses, in which we learn many lessons. Ananias assumed Paul had broken the law and was guilty, yet Paul hadn't gone for any trial. And we clearly see that in Deuteronomy 19:15, there has to be a witness before someone is convicted. The Pharisees believed in bodily resurrection, but the Sadducees did not. The Sadducees only followed the Pentateuch, that's Genesis to Deuteronomy. God gave Paul wisdom when he was under fire. We too shouldn't be afraid. God will give us wisdom when circumstances are beyond or above us. God knew the evil plan to kill Paul, and he used his nephew to speak about it to the commander. When we know someone is about to do evil, we shouldn't be quiet, because if we keep quiet, a life might be lost. But if we speak up, we might actually save a life. And then God works in ways we cannot explain, because he used a commander to get Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea, and in so doing, Paul's life was saved. So that's it from Acts chapter 23. And I'll see you again tomorrow as we see Acts chapter 24, in which Paul will appear before Governor Felix. God bless you.